Welcome to the PreSnap Podcast, presented by Line Star. All things daily fantasy football with a sprinkle of sports betting. I'm Shannon Somerville with your Thursday Night Football preview. Week 16, the Jacksonville Jaguars heading to MetLife Stadium to take on the New York Jets in a game that will have massive playoff implications in this one. The Jags are 6-8 coming off a big victory, an overtime win over the Dallas Cowboys with one of the top defenses in the NFL. Now they're just one game back in the AFC South behind the Tennessee Titans. They very much are still in contention for that AFC South crown. Meanwhile, the Jets, they are just one game back on the Dolphins for that third and final wildcard spot in the conference, so a lot at stake in this one. It's hard to believe it was just 2 years ago that the Tank for Trevor campaign was going on in New York. The Jets were 0-13 and looked like they had wrapped up that first overall pick in the draft and they were going to get Trevor Lawrence. Well, they won 2 out of the last 3 games, so that bumped them to number 2 overall. So it was the Jags who ended up taking Trevor Lawrence, and the Jets got Zach Wilson. And Zach Wilson's starting tonight because Mike White, who had replaced him, is out with a rib injury. So Zach Wilson against Trevor Lawrence, quite the storyline at MetLife Stadium this week. On today's show, we'll get into some injury reports, daily fantasy forecasts and projections. We'll have your touchdown calls, prop bets, and game picks. Let's get into it and start with our injury report here. We do have some consequential injuries to take note of. And we're going to SixScore.com, the pro football docs, giving us the best analysis before kickoff for what's going on the injury front. So taking a look at the Jets defense, defensive tackle Quinnen Williams is questionable with a calf injury. It's what held him out of last week's game, and man, they could have used him. Pro Football Doc says that even if he plays, he probably won't be 100% effective, but this is such a huge injury report. It will be a game time decision here, but Quinnen Williams is such a massive force on that defense, and if he is not in, that will impact the game significantly. On the Jags offense, Trevor Lawrence was dealing with a toe injury. He is expected to start. In fact, it's not really that significant. He's been dealing with it since week 13. There are some health issues on the offensive line as left tackle Cam Robinson out for the season with a torn meniscus. He suffered that against Dallas. So this is some pivotal stuff here. He'll be replaced by Walker Little in just his 4th career start. Let's flip it to the Jets offense. Quarterback Mike White, he's out with the rib injury, so it'll be Zach Wilson. Running back Zonovan Knight is questionable with an ankle injury, although it's looking like he will likely play. Jags defense, they have ruled out 2022 first-round pick linebacker Trayvon Walker due to an ankle injury there. So that's a look at your injuries. Remember to check out SixScore.com before you place your bets or play daily fantasy to make sure you got the best information on those injuries. Let's get into our daily fantasy projections for Thursday Night Football Week 16. Starting off with the hottest offense right now in the NFL, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. Looking at quarterback Trevor Lawrence, who's had an unbelievable month. He's the top projected player on Line Star in this matchup, although he's also the most expensive. He's over $1,000 more expensive on DraftKings and FanDuel, but for good reason. By EPA per dropback, he's the 3rd best quarterback over the last month. The question we'll be asking ourselves in daily fantasy, is he worth the money? Well, that depends. He has been putting up some pretty incredible numbers. 7.2 yards per play, the most by any team in Week 15 versus the Dallas Cowboys, who ranked top 5 in EPA per play allowed. He's had over 300 yards and 3+ touchdowns in 3 of the last 4 games, including most recently 318. He had 4 touchdowns against Dallas, and that defense ranks 3rd in the NFL in DVOA. Over the 6 weeks, 70.4 completion percentage, 1,680 yards. That's an average of 280 per game, 14 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. He's playing great football, great mistake-free football right now. One of the important things that I will be eyeing until game time is the status of Quinnen Williams, and I'll just explain how that kind of factors into my analysis of Trevor Lawrence. The Jets defense has been incredible this season, so Trevor Lawrence might not have a great matchup. I know he didn't against Dallas and he still had a great game. However, the Jets defense has been incredible. 6th in DVOA, 6th in pass defense, 7th in rush defense, allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. However, what I'm looking at here is Quinnen Williams' status, because this is so important. Williams being out or not 100%, that's huge. He's got the best interior pressure rate in the NFL. With Quinnen Williams on the field, the Jets have an 8.6 sack percentage and 41.1 pressure percentage, both of which rank in the top 5 in the NFL. Without Quinnen Williams on the field, 2.7 sack percentage, 25.7% pressure rating. Both would be dead last in the NFL. That's just how much he means to this defense. What I'm also looking at here when I'm evaluating these stats is I know that Jags offensive lineman Cam Robinson, he is out for the season with a torn meniscus, and he'll be replaced by Walker Little. And he's the second-round draft pick from 2021 and just his 4th career start. It's a little mismatch there for you. Even if Quinnen Williams isn't playing in this game, that's going to be a huge factor. Trevor Lawrence this season, his passer rating drops 41 points when pressured. If Quinnen Williams is in this game, that's a huge advantage for the Jets defense, and I think they will be generating a lot more pressure against Trevor Lawrence in this one, in which case I wouldn't value Trevor Lawrence as high in daily fantasy. Let's take a look at running back Travis Etienne, who's been great for fantasy owners and season-long fantasy owners like myself who have him on their team. He's got the 4th highest projected points total. He's averaging 82.5 yards from scrimmage per game, 4 touchdowns on the year. Really high ownership, though, is what we're projecting in this one. I don't love this matchup as much as I do some of the other plays that we'll get to. It's not a great matchup. Jets rank 7th in DVOA against the rush, 6th in pass defense DVOA versus running backs. So even if he might not get the rush yardage, which you kind of rely on with Travis Etienne, is what maybe he'll make up for it in the passing game. But in this game, with that Jets defense, I kind of see them stifling Travis Etienne in this one. So I'm not as high on Travis Etienne. He's a great player, and he's got the ability to put up those points in fantasy this week. However, I'm leaning away from him this particular week. As far as wide receivers go, we've got Christian Kirk in this one. He's the 2nd highest price tag behind Trevor Lawrence. He was targeted at least 7 times in 8 straight games. So we're liking the volume that he's getting. Last week, 6 of 10 targets, 92 yards against the Cowboys. Zay Jones obviously had the bigger game in this one. He's been putting up some great numbers. What I like about Christian Kirk here is I think he has a little bit better of a matchup than Zay Jones. Especially the Jets give up more fantasy points to slot wide receivers. And you've got Jets rookie stud cornerback Sauce Gardner performing well on the outside. So I think that Christian Kirk's in a better position here. The Jets do allow the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. However, Trevor's been throwing it well lately, so I think he can do it. And I think if we're going to go to a Jacksonville wide receiver, I like Christian Kirk. I think he's a great player. Just don't count out Sauce Gardner and that Jets defense in this one. Jared Goff didn't throw Sauce Gardner's way a single time last week. So I'm kind of just giving you all this analysis of the Jets defense because I think it will be very impactful, especially in a home game at MetLife Stadium. Taking a look now at Evan Ingram, the tight end, is averaging 44 receiving yards per game, 4 touchdowns on the year. He had 8 receptions, 10 targets for 62 yards against the Cowboys. 7th highest fantasy point projection in the game in this one is your tight end, Evan Ingram. 7 targets each of the last 3 games, including 5 red zone targets. So I kind of like Ingram in this one, specifically because he has been getting the volume, and the red zone targets is what we love in fantasy football. So the Jets have allowed 52.3 receiving yards per game to tight ends over the last 9 games, and that ranks 23rd. So even though I've just been talking about how good the Jets defense is, here's a little maybe Achilles heel for the defenses going up against some of these tight ends. Jets rank 10th in pass defense DVOA versus tight ends, and of all the stats, seeing the Jets 10th, that's probably their Achilles heel. All right, so that's kind of where I'm at. If we're going to go with the Jaguars, I'm kind of liking Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram in this one. Let's take a look at the Jets now. And Zach Wilson, okay? So he's coming in, and he hasn't been great for the Jets. Obviously, there was a reason he was benched. Last week didn't look that great either, although he did put up over 300 passing yards in that game, and a lot of the fault can't just rest solely with Zach Wilson in this one. Although what we can find fault with Zach Wilson is his completion percentage, 54.9%. That's the worst in the NFL. It seemed like in the last game against the Detroit Lions, he was throwing behind receivers, wasn't really connecting, just sometimes looked a little bit confused. So there's always that reluctance to go with somebody like that when you're playing daily fantasy. However, the blueprint is there for him to have a decent game and a great fantasy outing, especially since this Jags defense just hasn't been that good. Jacksonville ranks 32nd in pass defense DVOA. They're allowing the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, and they rank 28th in opponent red zone scoring percentage. So if Zach Wilson is going to have a good game, this is the game that we might see some great fantasy points in. So not a bad play here for daily fantasy. The only concern for me here is the Jets offensive line has been atrocious. They've been a problem the past 2 weeks. Last week, Wilson was pressured 22 times, sacked 4 times, and hit 5 more. And this is already a quarterback who's just trying to find his footing, gain a little confidence. So I think what we saw with him was he made a lot of mistakes. He threw in a crucial interception. So I think the offensive line is going to need to play a little bit better back there for Zach Wilson in order for him to have a really good game for daily fantasy purposes. But I'm still not really hating Zach Wilson as a daily fantasy play. And I'm a Jets fan, so I know all about the painful times that I've watched Zach Wilson perform this year. Trust me. All right, let's take a look at our wide receiver here, and Garrett Wilson, one of my favorite wide receivers this year in the NFL. Averaging 69 receiving yards per game. He's the highest projected wide receiver in this game for good reason. And he's less expensive than Christian Kirk actually on DraftKings. And Jacksonville's 28th in pass defense DVOA versus wide receiver ones. Listen, Garrett Wilson is an absolute freak. And I know there might be some reluctance given the quarterback situation. And obviously you like Garrett Wilson a lot better if Mike White is back there. But I think Garrett Wilson's so good. Zach Wilson just gets it in his general vicinity or area code, and he can come down with the ball. He's also pretty good on intermediate routes as well in breaking tackles and has a great burst of speed. So I do like Garrett Wilson this week going up against that Jags defense that has struggled against the pass. Running back Zonovan Knight is questionable in this game, although it's looking like he will start. So Bam Knight, love him since he's kind of come onto the scene over the past few weeks. Just 23 yards last game against Detroit. I did mention the offensive line has kind of struggled the past few weeks, so not really getting him some good blocks to go behind. Averaging 63 yards per game, though. Jacksonville, their strength is probably their rush defense. They rank 14th in rush defense DVOA. Where I do think he could provide some daily fantasy value is in the red zone. Jacksonville allows nearly a touchdown per game to opposing running backs, 0.9 touchdowns per game to running backs. So he could, if he has those touchdowns, that's good enough for me. How about tight end CJ Uzomah? I kind of like him over Tyler Conklin in this one. Hear me out. Uzomah's a lot bigger. He's 6'5", 271 pounds. He's huge, and he's just a tough guy to stop. We saw him last week score 2 touchdowns. And I also think that benefits him as well because Zach Wilson knows he's a guy that he trusts. He can maybe be more of like a safety blanket to Zach Wilson, so he could see some meaningful catches in this game. Jacksonville ranks 31st in pass defense DVOA versus opposing teams' tight end, so he's in a really good spot there as well. Another kind of sleeper-ish pick here is going to be wide receiver Elijah Moore. I think he's a great receiver. Over 50 yards in each of the last 4 games, including last week against Detroit. And you've got Jacksonville, who ranks 20th in pass defense DVOA versus opposing teams' wide receiver, too. I think Elijah Moore is a very underrated wide receiver, so I wouldn't be surprised if he pops off. If Zach Wilson can start to kind of find his rhythm offensively, he could hit a lot of these wide receivers for some big gains and big fantasy points. Make sure to check out linestarapp.com for all of this information and more, and our lineup optimizer to help you go win some money in these daily fantasy contests. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and we'll get back to you. Now it's time for our Week 16 Thursday Night Football touchdown calls of the game. In this game between the Jets and the Jags, I'm a Jets fan. I got to go with a Jet. I'm going CJ Uzomah, who's plus 700. I love that price. Had 2 touchdowns last week. He's 6'5", 271 pounds. He's so tough to defend. Going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense that ranks 31st in pass defense DVOA versus tight ends. They've allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends this season. That ranks 24th. And this Jacksonville Jaguars defense is 28th in opponent red zone scoring. Give me all the CJ Uzomah, especially with that juice. Oh, love that play. I've been going tight ends the past few weeks on my touchdown calls, and I got it right with Tyler Higbee and George Kittle, so we'll keep the tight end train rolling on our touchdown calls. Now let's get to our prop bets of the game. I'm going with Garrett Wilson over 56.5 receiving yards. Wilson's averaging 69 receiving yards per game. Are you kidding me? That line is criminally low. Over 6 of the last 7 games. This is a versatile receiver. He can make a big explosive play or make a play intermediate range, break tackles, use that breakaway speed for some huge gains. Jacksonville is 28th in pass defense DVOA versus the opposing team's wide receiver 1. I love this line. Take Garrett Wilson over 56.5 receiving yards. Go plug that in on Underdog Fantasy or on PrizePicks. And if you don't already have those, make sure to download them and use our promo codes for up to $100 of your deposit matched. Go lock in those props. Now it's time for our game picks in this one. The Jets favored by 1.5 at home at MetLife Stadium. And I'm taking the Jets in this one. Yes, I am a Jets fan, so I've got to go gang green on this one. But what's really convincing me is this Jets defense that's been phenomenal this season. This entire team and their wins and success has been predicated on that defense, specifically Quinnen Williams. So I'm really hoping that he plays in this game. Best interior pressure rate in the NFL. And Williams, when he's in the game, the Jets' pressure percentage increases by 20%, okay? When does Trevor Lawrence struggle? When he is pressured. His passer rating drops 41 points. The Jags have only won one game when Trevor Lawrence's completion percentage drops below 70. It was last week against the Cowboys. This Jets defense should be able to generate enough pressure to start to affect Lawrence. And I think, Zach Wilson isn't ideally who you'd like being in there. However, I think he's got all the weapons at his disposal to be able to at least put up some points for that Jets offense. And I think the Jets take this one and get one step closer to the playoffs. All right, I hope it helped you with your daily fantasy analysis and your prop betting. Make sure to like this video, comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Keep up with us with some notifications as well, and check out linestarapp.com for all the analysis and analytics, statistics, everything you need to dominate daily fantasy and on your prop bets as well. Good luck to you. Thursday night football game. Finally, we've got a really great game with some playoff implications. Here we go, heading into the final stretch of the season. Drop your comments below. We'll see you next time.